The hum was the first thing Kalen registered, a sound that was not a sound at all, but a vibration felt deep in the marrow of his bones. It was the quiescent state of the Stellifer, his ship, a resonance that sang of folded space, contained singularities, and the silent, patient violence of hegemony engineering. He floated in the command gel, a transparent, amniotic fluid that buffered him against the impossible physics the vessel performed as easily as breathing. Before him, the starfield was not a window, but a direct neural projection, a perfect, seamless immersion into the void. There were no consoles, no flashing buttons, no frantic chatter of a bridge crew. There was only him, the gel, and the warden, the integrated ship intelligence that was less a machine and more an extension of his own will. For 2 centuries, this had been the way. Humanity had not gone extinct in the Great Fire as the galaxy believed. It had gone to chrysalis. The chaotic, squabbling nations of old Earth had burned away, and from the ashes, the hegemony was born a unified, single-minded entity that had purged the inefficiencies of emotion, art, and individual ambition. They had spent those silent centuries sharpening themselves into a blade, and now the galaxy was beginning to feel their edge. A soft chime, like falling ice, echoed in Kalen's mind. It was the warden, alerting him. Target acquired. Signian compact vessel. Designation Chronicler's Hope is on approach vector to the artifact. Kalen's eyes, the silver gray of polished steel, remained fixed on the projection. The target was a ghost, a relic from the very past the hegemony had worked so hard to erase. Deep Space Probe Wanderer 7, launched in the final, turbulent years before the fire. It was a primitive machine, a golden disk carrying the sights and sounds of a dead civilization. It held greetings in 53 languages, the music of Bach and the blues, images of laughing children and warring armies, the entire messy, contradictory soul of old Earth. To the hegemony, it was a plague ship, a carrier of the very sentimentality that had nearly driven their species to annihilation. To the Signians, a race of gentle, feathered scholars who curated the galaxy's history. It was the ultimate prize. Kalen's mission was simple, a task of sanitation. Intercept the Wanderer, erase it from existence, erase any who may have accessed its data. There was no malice in the order, merely the cold logic of quarantine. The Signian vessel slid into view on the neural display, and Kalen felt a flicker of something he could not name. The Chronicler's Hope was a work of art, a spiraling construction of crystalline lattices and solar sails that caught the light of a distant nebula like a dragonfly's wing. It radiated energy, light, and a naive openness. It was broadcasting its identity and purpose on all channels, a standard greeting protocol for peaceful academic research. It was beautiful, inefficient, and utterly obsolete. The Stellifer, by contrast, was an absence, a sliver of matte black alloy that did not reflect light but devoured it, its silhouette barely distinguishable from the void itself. It had no visible engines, no windows, no lights. It moved by unwriting the space-time in front of it and rewriting it behind, a process that left no heat, no radiation, no signature of any kind. To the Signians, Kalen was not there. He would never be there. He would be an act of God, a sudden, inexplicable tragedy. The Chronicler's Hope is extending a retrieval arm. The warden's voice informed him, a calm, androgynous tone that was the auditory equivalent of polished chrome. They are within 1,000 kilometers of the artifact. Shall I initiate the scouring protocol? The scouring protocol was clean. A localized dissolution field would simply unmake the Cygnian ship and the probe, atom by atom, leaving nothing behind but the faint, lingering scent of ozone in the quantum foam. It was the standard procedure. It was logical. But Kalen hesitated. A pause that lasted only a fraction of a second, but felt like an eternity in the silent communion between him and his ship. He was a collector, a specialist tasked with retrieving and purging pre-fire technologies. He had dismantled rogue AIs clinging to life in the ruins of Mars, erased orbital server farms containing the last digital vestiges of poetry and politics, and walked the silent, dust-choked streets of old Earth itself, ensuring its ghosts remained buried. He had seen the chaos of the past firsthand, the artifacts of a species tearing itself apart with feeling. He knew the danger the Wanderer represented. Yet, watching the graceful, unsuspecting Cygnian vessel, a part of him, a deeply buried legacy code he thought had been silenced long ago, felt a tremor of, what pity. It was an illogical, wasteful emotion. Negative. Warden. Kalen transmitted through thought alone. Execute protocol stillness. Isolate the Cygnian vessel. Do not destroy it. The Warden's response was immediate, without question or curiosity. Acknowledged. Engaging stillness field. The hum in Kalen's bones deepened. Outside, nothing appeared to happen. There was no beam of light, no torpedo, no visible wave of energy. But on the bridge of the Chronicler's Hope, reality buckled. The feathered Cygnian captain watched in baffled terror as his ship simply stopped. The engines were still at full power, but their thrust produced no acceleration. The navigational gyros spun uselessly, unable to alter the ship's orientation. Every system reported perfect functionality, yet the vessel was frozen in space, locked in a single immutable frame of space-time. Alarms shrieked, only to be cut off as the ship's internal timeline was stretched to near infinity. A single second on the Cygnian bridge would now last for a standard year. They were trapped, not in a tractor beam, but in a bubble of stalled time. With the Cygnians neutralized, a living museum exhibit, Kalen nudged the Stellifer forward. He drifted past the frozen ship, its crystalline hull pristine, its crew caught in postures of silent, eternal panic. He felt like a biologist observing a specimen pinned to a board. He was close now, close to the source of the infection. The Wanderer 7 probe tumbled slowly in the void. It was so crude, a relic of slapped-together panels, a high-gain antenna, and the faint, unmistakable sheen of the golden record. It was a message in a bottle from a shipwrecked world, a world that had screamed its existence into the cosmos with desperate, childlike hope. The hegemony did not hope. It calculated. It acted. It endured. Warden, prepare a localized disintegration sequence for the artifact. Kalen commanded, his resolve hardening. The logic was undeniable. The past was a disease. This was the cure. Sequence armed, the Warden replied. Kalen's finger, suspended in the command gel, twitched over the non-physical command node that would execute the order. But his gaze was fixed on the golden record, glinting in the faint starlight. On its cover was a diagram, a simple etching of a man and a woman, their hands raised in a universal gesture of greeting. A map of their solar system, a key to their location, a foolish, trusting invitation to a galaxy they knew nothing about. It was the ultimate vulnerability, an act of such profound, irrational faith that it defied every principle the hegemony was built upon. He thought of the records he had reviewed in his training, the final broadcasts from old Earth, the screaming, the fire, the politicians promising salvation while their cities burned, the poets weeping for a world they had broken with their own passions. The hegemony had been the only answer. Silence had been the only salvation. He had to complete the mission, and yet, for the first time in his operational history, Kalen felt a surge of something other than cold purpose. It was not emotion, not as the ancients would have known it. It was a dissonant chord in the clean logic of his mind, a question that bloomed like a dark flower. What if the cure was worse than the disease? What if, in purging their weaknesses, they had also purged the very thing that made them worth preserving? It was a heretical thought, a system error that could get him decommissioned and wiped. He should have silenced it, flagged it for his own psychological review. Instead, he let it resonate. He looked at the frozen Cygnian ship, a vessel built for wonder and discovery, now a monument to the hegemony's silent, absolute power. He looked at the Wanderer 7, a fragile token of a flawed, vibrant, and extinct humanity. He was the blade sent to cut the final thread connecting the present to the past. Warden. Kalen's thought was sharp, decisive. Disarm the disintegration sequence. The Warden complied without comment. Open a secure, one-way channel to the probe's data storage. I am assuming direct access. The Warden paused for a nanosecond longer than usual, a computational flicker that was the closest the AI could come to surprise. Accessing the artifact directly is a Level 5 violation of Quarantine Protocol 1. It carries the risk of memetic contamination. Memetic contamination. The hegemony's greatest fear, not a virus of the body, but a virus of the mind, an idea, an emotion, a memory of what it was like to be human before the silence fell. I am aware of the risk, Kalen sent back, his voice in his own mind a stranger's, imbued with a gravity he had never felt before. Execute the command. The connection was established. A stream of raw, ancient data began to flow directly into his neural interface, bypassing the Stellifer's logic filters. It was archaic, a chaotic jumble of binary code, but the Warden began to translate. First came the images, a blue and white marble of a world, teeming with a vibrancy the sterile, terraformed planets of the hegemony lacked. Then faces, so many faces, each one unique, their expressions a symphony of joy, sorrow, anger, and love. Then came the sounds, the roar of an ocean, the cry of a newborn child, the complex, soaring harmonies of an orchestra. And then a voice, a man named Carl Sagan, speaking of loneliness and the hope of contact. It was a torrent, a tidal wave of unfiltered, chaotic, beautiful humanity. It was everything he had been trained to identify as a weakness, a fatal flaw in the species' design. But as the data washed over him, flooding the clean, sterile corridors of his hegemony-conditioned mind, Kalen did not feel disgust or fear. He felt a profound, aching sense of loss, a grief for a world he had never known, but whose ghost now lived inside him. In that moment, suspended in the silent void between a frozen monument to the present and a fragile echo of the past, Kalen the Collector, the loyal agent of the hegemony, ceased to exist. In his place was something new, something uncertain, something dangerously, terrifyingly human. The hum of the Stellifer no longer felt like a song of power, but the drone of a cage. The symphony was the first true assault. It was not a sound, but a structure, a complex architecture of harmonic frequencies that bypassed logic and hammered directly on the vestigial nodes of his limbic system. The warden identified it as the work of a composer named Bach, a chaotic cascade of mathematical progressions designed to evoke an emotional response designated as awe. To Kalen, it felt like a system breach, a meticulously crafted virus rewriting his core programming. The data from the Wanderer was a relentless deluge. He sifted through it with the detached precision of a collector, categorizing, analyzing, trying to contain the damage. The laughter of a child was logged as non-linguistic vocalization, positive emotional signifier. A poem about love was filed under abstract mimetic construct, high sentimentality index, zero practical application. He was trying to build a firewall of logic against a flood of pure, irrational sensation, but the firewall was cracking. The images were the worst. He saw a man weeping over a fallen comrade in a muddy field, an act of communal grief that was a grotesque waste of metabolic energy. He saw a painter applying pigments to a canvas, creating a representation of a sunset that was less accurate than any simple holographic capture, yet it pulsed with a meaning that defied data. He saw them all, the billions of ghosts from old Earth, living their messy, inefficient, passionate lives, and he felt the walls of his sterile reality begin to crumble. Collector, your biometrics indicate a state of cognitive dissonance. The warden's voice chimed in his mind, a calm anchor in the storm. Heart rate is elevated. Neural activity is operating outside of established mission parameters. I recommend purging the contaminating data and returning to protocol. The warden was right. The logical path was clear. He could sever the connection, trigger the scouring protocol as originally ordered, and erase this entire sector of space, including the memory of his own transgression. He could report a sensor malfunction, a momentary lapse that had been corrected. The hegemony's systems were designed for success, not for the investigation of minor deviations that were self-rectified. He could go back. He could be Kalen the Collector again, a perfect, silent instrument of the hegemony's will. But the music of Bach was still echoing in the architecture of his mind. He looked at the neural projection, at the golden disk of the Wanderer, a tiny, insignificant piece of metal that now held the weight of a soul. To destroy it now would not be an act of sanitation. It would be an act of murder. It would be the final, definitive execution of his own ancestors. Negative. Warden, Kalen thought, the decision solidifying into something as hard and real as the hull of his ship. Maintain the connection. Begin cross-referencing the probe's linguistic data with known galactic languages. Find a species that could comprehend its core message. The warden's pause this time was measurable, a full 1.2 seconds of computational silence. Collector, your directive is illogical. The purpose of the data is its containment and eradication, not its dissemination. Dissemination is the primary vector of mimetic contamination. Kalen felt a ghost of an old Earth emotion, something the data files labeled defiance. The hegemony believes the past is a disease. He transmitted, I am beginning to suspect it is a vaccine. A vaccine against this. He did not need to elaborate. The warden understood. This was the silent, sterile purposeful void of their existence. While Kalen was wrestling with his newfound conscience, his deviation had not gone unnoticed. In the cold, dark heart of the hegemony's command nexus, deep beneath the reconstructed surface of Titan, an alert flickered. It was not a blaring siren or a flashing red light, but a single data point in a trillion, a subtle anomaly in the quantum-entangled network that bound all hegemony assets. Collector Kalen's mission was 3.7 standard hours overdue. His vessel, the Stellifer, had ceased its routine status pings. It was still there, its space-time signature confirmed, but it was silent. For the hegemony, unscheduled silence was the only alarm that mattered. In a private chamber, insulated from all external reality, Executor Valerius received the notification. Like Kalen, he was suspended in a command gel. His consciousness merged with his ship, the Vigil. But where the Stellifer was a blade designed for surgical removal, the Vigil was an instrument of audit and, if necessary, purification. Valerius was not a collector, he was a corrector. His purpose was to maintain the integrity of the hegemony itself, to hunt down and excise any internal corruption, any hint of the old human disease of individuality. He reviewed the data from Kalen's sector, the presence of the Signian vessel, the discovery of the pre-fire artifact, and now, the silence. He felt no anger, no disappointment. He felt only a cold, clear sense of purpose. An instrument was malfunctioning. It needed to be recalibrated or, if recalibration was impossible, decommissioned. Warden Vigil, Valerius's thought, was the psychic equivalent of a razor's edge. Plot a course. Do not engage. Do not announce our presence. We will observe the anomaly and determine the extent of its decay. The Vigil, a ship that was a near identical twin to the Stellifer, did not move in the traditional sense. It simply edited its location in the universe, folding space-time around itself in a maneuver so precise that it left not even a gravitational whisper. In one moment, it was in orbit of Titan. In the next, it was on the edge of Kalen's sector, a silent, unseen predator watching from the darkness. On the Stellifer, Kalen was becoming a fugitive without even knowing he was being hunted. He had made his decision. He could not destroy the probe, and he could not leave the Signians trapped in their temporal prison. He had to set them free. But to do so would be to announce the hegemony's existence to the galaxy in the most uncontrolled way imaginable. The Signians had seen his ship, even if they hadn't registered it. They had experienced hegemony technology firsthand. Their release would be an act of interstellar chaos. And in that chaos, Kalen saw his only path to survival. He needed a diversion. A loud, messy event that would draw the galaxy's attention here. While he and his contagious cargo disappeared, Warden, I calculate the temporal whiplash effect of a sudden collapse of the stillness field, Kalen ordered. The Warden processed the request. The subjective experience for the occupants of the Chronicler's Hope will be instantaneous. However, their ship's internal chronometers will register a temporal anomaly of approximately 4.2 standard years. The discrepancy will be severe, likely causing systemic psychological trauma and immediate, widespread galactic inquiry. It is an act of extreme informational warfare. Kalen almost smiled. It was an old Earth expression he had only just learned, a baring of the teeth that signified satisfaction. Excellent, he thought. Now, secure the artifact. Bring the Wanderer probe into the primary containment bay. Use a non-contact gravimetric tractor. I don't want to damage it. The Stellifer extended a filament of pure gravitational force, a thread of invisible power that gently snared the tumbling probe and reeled it in. As the ancient machine slid into the dark, sterile confines of his ship, Kalen felt as if he were hiding a sacred relic inside a tomb. With the probe secure, there was only one thing left to do. Warden, prepare to collapse the stillness field on my mark, simultaneously plot a random multi-jump sequence deep into the unclaimed territories. Erase all navigational logs as we go. Acknowledged. The warden replied, Be advised. Collector, this course of action is irreversible. You will be designated a rogue element. Your access to the hegemony network will be severed. You will be hunted. I am no longer a collector, Kalen thought, the words feeling strange and true. I am a curator. He focused on the projection of the chronicler's hope, still frozen, a perfect crystal sculpture. It was time to break the glass and mark. The hum in his bones changed pitch, a deep thrum that resonated with the sound of a closing door. The stillness field vanished. For the Signians, there was no transition. One moment, their captain was staring in terror at a blank spot in space where the primitive probe had been. His retrieval arm extended. The next instant, the probe was gone, and his ship was floating alone. A cacophony of alarms erupted as every system on the Chronicler's Hope screamed in confusion. The ship's chronometer was reporting a date 4 years in the future. Their star charts were subtly, terrifyingly wrong. They had lost 4 years in the blink of an eye. They were victims of a ghost, a phantom that had stolen a priceless artifact and 4 years of their lives without ever showing its face. As the Signians descended into panicked chaos, broadcasting a frantic, garbled distress call to their compact, the Stellifer was already gone. It unwrote itself from that coordinate of space-time and vanished into the void, leaving behind only the faintest of ripples. Miles away, Executor Valerius watched the scene unfold from the silent bridge of the Vigil. He saw the stillness field collapse. He saw the Signian ship burst back into chaotic life. He saw the empty space where the artifact and the Stellifer had been. He did not need sensors to know what had happened. Kalen had not malfunctioned. He had defected. He had become contaminated and had chosen to embrace the disease, to become a carrier. Valerius felt the closest thing a hegemony executor could to an emotion, a profound, cold certainty. The anomaly had not decayed. It had metastasized. The mission was no longer one of recalibration. It was one of sterilization. Warden Vigil. Valerius commanded, his mind a perfect crystal of resolve. The target is no longer Kalen. The target is the mimetic plague he carries. Analyze the Signian distress call. Analyze the nature of the temporal ripple. Calculate the fugitive's most probable emotional response vector. He thinks he is running randomly, but his new flaws will give him a pattern. We will not chase him. We will intercept him. The hunt had begun. Valerius would not be pursuing a rogue ship. He would be pursuing a rogue idea, a ghost from a past that refused to stay dead. And he would not fail. The silence of the hegemony demanded it. The silence was the first true consequence, not the silent, humming readiness of a hegemony vessel, but a profound and terrifying emptiness. For his entire existence, Kalen had been a node in a network, his mind subtly interwoven with the vast, cool consciousness of the hegemony's quantum-entangled command structure. There had always been a background hum of data, a sense of belonging to a greater, perfectly ordered machine. Now, there was nothing. The warden had been correct. The moment the Stellifer had executed its first rogue jump, the network had excised him like a cancerous cell. He was alone, adrift in the void with only a ghost AI and a library of forbidden emotions for company. The data from the Wanderer was no longer a flood. It was the new ocean he swam in. It had begun to self-organize in his mind, weaving itself into the fabric of his consciousness. He found himself running subconscious simulations based on its contents. He would experience a flash of what the files called nostalgia while observing a particular spiral nebula that resembled a painter's brushstroke from an ancient artwork. He felt pang of sorrow when the warden reported the half-life decay of a star, an emotion as useless as it was potent. He was becoming inefficient, his thought processes cluttered with the sentimental baggage of a dead species. He was becoming human. Our random jump sequence is statistically unsustainable. The warden's voice cut through his reverie, a welcome intrusion of pure logic. Our energy reserves are finite. A patternless flight path is the most inefficient method of evasion. The probability of interception by a superior tactical intelligence increases with every jump. Kalen floated in the gel, the star field a dizzying, shifting tapestry around him as the Stellifer prepared for another space-time edit. Valerius is not a superior intelligence, Kalen thought back, testing the idea. He is a limited one. His logic is pure, but it is a closed system. He cannot account for variables he does not believe exist. Your newfound sentimentality is not a variable he cannot account for, the warden countered coolly. It is the primary variable he is calculating. He will not be tracking our ship's energy signature. He will be tracking the signature of your deviation. He will predict where a mind infected with hope or desperation would run. Your randomness is a facade. Your motives are becoming predictable. The warden's logic was a cold spike of fear in Kalen's gut, another old Earth sensation he was learning to identify. The AI was right. Valerius wouldn't be looking for a rogue collector. He would be looking for a man clutching a relic, and that man would not run to empty space. He would run toward something. He would be looking for shelter, for an ally, for a place that understood the value of the past. While Kalen grappled with this new reality, a far colder mind was reducing it to a set of variables. Inside the vigil, Executor Valerius had already dismissed the chaotic energy readings of Kalen's random jumps. They were noise, the panicked flailings of a contaminated mind. He was focused on the source code of the contamination itself, the Golden Record. He had the full hegemony archives at his disposal, including a copy of the Wanderer's original mission parameters and the contents of its data disk. He was not just studying Kalen, he was studying Boss, and the blues, and the faint, hopeful voice of the astronomer. He analyzed the star map etched on the record's cover, a primitive but clear guide to old Earth's celestial neighborhood. He noted the trajectory lines pointing towards distant constellations, places the ancients had looked to with a sense of wonder. The contamination is rooted in a reverence for origins and a fascination with historical narrative. Valerius transmitted to his own warden. The fugitive will not seek a fortress. He will seek a library, a museum, a tomb. He believes he is preserving history. He will therefore run to a place where history is gathered and left to decay. Valerius brought up a galactic chart, but he filtered it not for strategic locations or habitable zones, but for gravitational anomalies, black markets dealing in pre-Republic artifacts, and dead space zones where galactic law was a polite fiction. His logic was flawless. He wasn't chasing a ship through space. He was following a mimetic infection through a psyche, and he knew exactly where the disease would lead. Plot an intercept course for the sector designated the Sargasso of Ruin, Valerius commanded. The fugitive's emotional logic will draw him to the galaxy's largest graveyard. He will attempt to hide his relic among the other ghosts. We will be waiting. The galactic community, meanwhile, was reacting to the Cygnian's fractured, terrified report. The story of the temporal ghost of Sector 414 was spreading like wildfire. A peaceful academic vessel had been held captive for 4 years in the blink of an eye by an invisible force that had stolen a priceless artifact from the dawn of a forgotten race. The Cygnian Compact demanded answers, but no one had any. The Great Powers. From the militaristic Tholian ascendancy to the mercantile guilds of the Cygnus Arm ran sensor logs and deep space archival records. They found nothing. There was no ship class that could manipulate time, no energy signature that could freeze a vessel in space-time, no faction that operated with such silent, absolute power. For 2 centuries, the galaxy had operated on a known set of rules, a predictable balance of power. Now, a new player was on the board, a phantom that obeyed no known laws of physics and seemed to have emerged from the grave of humanity itself. Fleets were mobilized to the edge of what was once human space, not to attack, but to form a cautious, terrified perimeter. They were not looking for an enemy. They were looking for a god or a devil, and they were not sure which would be worse. Kalen knew nothing of this. His universe had shrunk to the confines of the Stellifer's hull. He had come to the same conclusion as Valerius, albeit from the opposite direction. He needed to hide, not in the emptiness of the void, but in the clutter of the past. He accessed the Stellifer's deep archives that the hegemony itself had compiled, lists of galactic dead zones to be avoided. One stood out the Sargasso of Ruin. It was a gravitational eddy on the edge of the unclaimed territories, a cosmic cul-de-sac where derelict starships from 10,000 years of galactic history had come to rest. It was a chaotic, lawless place, a metal reef populated by scavengers, hermits, and outlaws. It was the last place a pristine hegemony vessel would ever go. It was perfect. Warden, set a course for the Sargasso of Ruin, Kalen commanded. We will hide the ship among the derelicts. It will be our needle in a haystack of needles. A strategically sound choice, the warden conceded. The chaos of the environment will provide significant sensor camouflage. However, it also introduces unpredictable external variables. The inhabitants are not part of any ordered system. Neither are we anymore, Kalen replied. The final jump was different. It was a short, precise edit of space-time that brought them to the edge of the Sargasso. The sight that greeted Kalen on the neural display was a stark, breathtaking violation of every hegemony design principle. It was a graveyard of giants. Thousands of dead ships, from hulking, skeletal war frames of the old Cathar Empire to the delicate, shattered solar sails of vessels from races long since extinct, were tangled together in a slow, silent dance of decay. They formed a vast, three-dimensional labyrinth of rusted metal, fractured crystal, and broken dreams. It was a monument to failure, to entropy, to the very messiness of history the hegemony sought to erase. It was the most beautiful thing Kalen had ever seen. He guided the Stellifer deep into the wreckage, its black, seamless hull a sliver of absolute order moving through a universe of chaos. The ship's sensors, designed to track the faintest of quantum signatures, were overwhelmed by the sheer noise of dying reactors, weeping bulkheads, and the faint, lingering psychic echoes of a million final moments. They found a cavernous opening in the shattered hull of a Leviathan freighter that had been dead for 1,000 years and slipped inside, powering down all non-essential systems. The hum in Kalen's bones faded to a whisper. For the first time, the Stellifer was truly asleep. He spent days, then weeks, in the silence, listening. He listened to the data on the golden record, absorbing the music, the languages, the scientific principles of a civilization that had reached for the stars with hands still stained with the dirt of their own world. And he listened to the Sargasso. Through the warden's passive sensors, he began to learn the rhythms of the place. He watched scavenger crews and patchwork ships cut away pieces of ancient battle cruisers. He overheard fragmented, encrypted communications between hermit scholars and information brokers. This was the galaxy the hegemony had hidden from, a vibrant, chaotic ecosystem of survivors and opportunists. He was an observer, a ghost in his own tomb, but he could not stay hidden forever. The Stellifer's energy reserves were not infinite, and the Wanderer probe was more than just data. It was a physical object. It was a declaration. It needed to be heard, not hidden. He detected a single, persistent, and remarkably stable energy signature emanating from the heart of the Sargasso. It was not a ship, but a small, self-sufficient habitat built into the command spire of a derelict Republic-era dreadnought. It was old, but its systems were meticulously maintained. A single life form resided within. "Warden, identify the inhabitant," Kalen ordered. Unable to confirm species, the habitat's shielding is archaic but effective, the warden reported. However, they are broadcasting a simple, repeating, open-frequency signal. It is a welcome beacon. The signal is a fragment of a pre-Republic trading language. It translates to "the archivist is in. All stories are welcome." An archivist, a keeper of stories. It was too perfect to be a coincidence, yet too random to be a trap. Valerius would never use such a poetic, inefficient lure. This was something else. This was a variable the hegemony had not calculated. This was a chance. For the first time, Kalen felt the need to step outside the sterile perfection of his ship, to breathe the recycled air of another's world, to speak with a voice other than his own mind's. "Warden," he commanded, his heart, a useless, traitorous organ, beating a rapid, unfamiliar rhythm. "Prepare the interface. I am going to answer the signal." As the Stellifer began to power up a communications laser, a tight, untraceable beam aimed at the archivist's spire on the far side of the Sargasso, the vigil drifted silently into the outer debris field. Executor Valerius watched his own neural display, which showed a single, faint flicker of energy from deep within the graveyard. It was the unmistakable signature of a hegemony comm system activating. A cold, thin sliver of satisfaction settled in his mind. The contagion seeks a host, Valerius thought. His purpose absolute. The quarantine has failed. The sterilization must now begin. The voice that answered was like the sound of rustling parchment, dry and ancient, yet laced with a clarity that cut through the background static of the Sargasso. It was not a voice Kalen had ever heard, not from the Wanderer's archives, not from the hegemony's threat assessment files. It was something else, something old and patient. "A new story," The voice crackled over the comms. The words formed in the archaic trade tongue. One that whispers instead of shouts. You have been silent for a long time, little ghost. I have been listening to your silence. It has its own tale to tell. Kalen was momentarily stunned. He had initiated the contact, but the response was one of recognition. He had been detected. The Stellifer's passive, undetectable state was, to this archivist, a signal in itself. Warden, reevaluate the target. How did they detect us, Kalen thought, a new layer of caution hardening over his resolve. Reevaluating, the warden replied. The archivist's habitat is layered with sensor technology I cannot identify. It is not based on quantum mechanics or space-time distortion. It appears to be biological, symbiotic. The entire dreadnought spire may be part of a single living sensory organ. Our silence to their senses would be the equivalent of a dead spot in a living creature's field of vision, a hole. An absence is as noticeable as a presence. A living ship, a concept so alien, so inefficient. It had never been considered by hegemony tacticians. Kalen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the command gel. He was out of his depth, a creature of pure logic confronting something that had blurred the line between technology and life. I am not a ghost, Kalen transmitted back, his own voice, unused for so long, feeling rough and alien in his own throat. He used the same trade language, the warden translating his thoughts into flawless, unaccented syntax. I am a curator. I carry an item of great historical significance, a story that was thought to be lost. There was a long pause, filled only with the faint crackle of interstellar dust. Then, the voice of the archivist returned, a dry chuckle rustling through the static. All stories are thought to be lost until they are found again. Curator. That is the nature of history. It does not die. It merely sleeps. Bring your story. My door is always open. But be warned. Little ghost, you are not the only one who has been drawn to this place. There is another silence here. A newer one. A colder one. It does not listen. It only waits. The warning was clear. Valerius was here. He was not just hunting. He was herding. He had allowed Kalen to run to this specific place, to this specific point of contact. This was not a chase. It was a carefully constructed trap. And the archivist was the bait. Kalen had a choice. He could retreat, flee back into the chaos of the Sargasso and the uncertainty of a continued flight, or he could walk into the trap, betting on the one variable that Valerius could not have fully calculated, the archivist itself. To the hegemony, the inhabitants of the Sargasso were background noise, insignificant detritus. To Kalen, they were now a potential, unpredictable ally. Warden, what is the probability that the archivist is in league with the second hegemony vessel? Kalen asked. Calculating. The warden paused. Probability is less than 0.01%. The second vessel's tactical signature is one of absolute control and sterilization. The archivist represents chaos and preservation. Their core directives are diametrically opposed. It is more likely the second vessel perceives the archivist as part of the contamination to be purged. Kalen's mind raced. Valerius wasn't just here for him and the Wanderer. He was here to cleanse the entire Sargasso of its chaotic, historical filth. Valerius would see this entire graveyard of memories as a threat to the clean, sterile future of the hegemony. Kalen was no longer just a fugitive. He was the catalyst for a massacre. The weight of that responsibility settled on him, a crushing, physical force. It was one thing to defy his orders. It was another to bring annihilation down upon others. The data from the Wanderer offered no guidance for this, no simple moral axiom. It only offered the stories of flawed beings making impossible choices. "I am on my way," Kalen transmitted to the archivist. His decision made. He would not run. He would not let Valerius dictate the terms of this encounter. He would force his hand. Warden, prepare a single, high-yield data burst. Transmit the complete, unencrypted contents of the Wanderer probe on all open frequencies. Target every active system in the Sargasso. The Warden's response was, for the first time, tinged with something that resembled alarm. Collector. That action is strategically insane. It will broadcast our exact position and the nature of our cargo to the enemy vessel. It is the tactical equivalent of suicide. It is not suicide, Kalen countered, his thoughts sharp and clear. It is a declaration of intent. Valerius wants to contain a secret. I am going to make that secret the property of everyone in this system. He can't kill the story if everyone has a copy. It was an act of pure, old Earth defiance. A move born not of logic, but of a desperate, newfound faith in the power of an idea. Execute, Kalen commanded. A spear of pure information erupted from the Stellifer. It was not a weapon of destruction, but of revelation. The sound of Bach's cello suites. The images of Earth's teeming cities. The greetings in 53 languages. The voice of a long-dead astronomer speaking of wonder and hope. It all flooded the chaotic comms channels of the Sargasso of ruin. Scavenger captains, listening in on encrypted channels for their next score, suddenly heard the cry of a whale. Hermit scholars, meditating in their isolated pods, saw the image of a human family sharing a meal. The entire graveyard, a place of endings and decay, was filled with the vibrant, chaotic, and utterly unexpected beginning of a forgotten species. On the bridge of the vigil, Executor Valerius watched the data burst bloom across his neural display like a digital supernova. For a fraction of a second, his perfect, cold logic was disrupted by a flicker of pure, unadulterated fury. This was the ultimate act of contamination. Kalen had not just defected, he had become a prophet, spreading his mimetic gospel to the unwashed masses of the Sargasso. The mission parameters had changed irrevocably. Containment was no longer an option. Warden Vigil. Valerius's thought was no longer a razor, but a cleaver. The fugitive has initiated a full-scale mimetic outbreak. All entities within this sector are now considered vectors of the contagion. Initiate protocol. Final silence. The time for observation is over. The time for purification is now. The vigil began to move. It did not emerge from the debris field with a roar of engines, but with a creeping, terrifying sense of inevitability. It began to systematically target and erase every active energy signature in the Sargasso. A scavenger ship, its crew still reeling from the sudden, beautiful music pouring from their comms, simply ceased to exist, its matter unwritten from the fabric of space-time. An old, repurposed mining station, where a lone prospector was staring in wonder at an image of an ocean, folded in on itself and vanished. Valerius was not destroying ships. He was deleting paragraphs from a history he was determined to erase. Kalen saw it all happening. The warden was feeding him the casualty reports, a steady, sickening stream of disappearing life signs. His grand gesture of defiance had become a death sentence for hundreds of beings who had done nothing but have the misfortune of being in his vicinity. The guilt was a physical thing, a crushing weight that made the command gel feel as thick as lead. I did this, he thought, the realization a shard of ice in his soul. This is my fault. They are coming for you, little ghost. The archivist's voice cut through his despair, calm and steady amidst the chaos. But you have given them a gift, a story, and stories have a power that even silence cannot entirely erase. You must bring the original to me. The copy is the spark. The original is the flame. It must be preserved. Kalen forced himself to focus. Guilt was a luxury he could not afford. The archivist was offering a final, desperate gambit. Warden, plot a direct course to the archivist's spire. Full power, and prepare the scouring protocol. But do not target the vigil. Target us. The warden's computational mind, for once, could find no logic in the order. Collector, that is a contradiction. The scouring protocol is designed for external targets. It cannot be self-initiated without a fail-safe override that requires the total psychological commitment of the command intelligence. Kalen finished the thought. I am aware. I am the command intelligence, and I am committed. He now understood the final, terrible lesson of the Wanderer's data. Humanity had not just been passionate and chaotic. It had been capable of sacrifice. It was the one variable that hegemony logic could never truly comprehend. He pushed the Stellifer out of its hiding place, the sleek black ship a dart of pure purpose amidst the dying stars of the Sargasso. He raced toward the archivist's spire, a beacon in the growing darkness. The vigil immediately changed its vector, ignoring the lesser targets, its full, cold attention now fixed on him. Valerius was coming to finish this personally. Kalen flew with a desperate aid and a suicidal grace, weaving through the skeletal remains of dead ships as the vigil closed the distance, its own space-time edits bringing it closer with each passing second. He could feel Valerius's cold, analytical mind pressing against his own, a psychic weight of pure, murderous intent. He was a few thousand kilometers from the spire when the vigil appeared directly in front of him, a perfect black mirror of his own vessel. It did not fire. It did not hail. It simply waited, blocking his path, an avatar of absolute, silent authority. This was the end of the line, but Kalen was not looking at Valerius. He was looking at the countdown timer that now hovered in his neural vision, a timer linked to the scouring protocol he had armed and aimed at himself. Warden. His final command was calm, resonant with a purpose that was no longer hegemony, but entirely his own. Jettison the containment bay. The story must survive. In the silent, frozen space between the two perfect black ships, the Stellifer's main bay doors opened, and a small, golden object was gently ejected into the void, tumbling slowly towards the ancient, waiting spire of the archivist. It was a message in a bottle, cast into a new, and far more dangerous, ocean. Then, Kalen closed his eyes and triggered the end. The space between the two ships was a vacuum not just of atmosphere, but of time. For a frozen, eternal second, the hunter and the hunted faced each other in perfect, silent opposition. On the bridge of the vigil, Executor Valerius processed Kalen's final act not with surprise, but with a cold, clarifying diagnosis. The contagion had reached its terminal stage. The infected host was now attempting a final, pointless act of martyrdom, a core concept of old Earth's most destructive mythologies. It was illogical, sentimental, and utterly futile. The jettisoned probe, a tiny speck of gold tumbling through the void, was now the primary target. Kalen's self-immolation was a secondary concern. The final spasm of a dying organism. Warden Vigil. Initiate a bifurcated scouring sequence. Valerius commanded, his mind a flawless engine of tactical precision. Primary beam on the artifact. Secondary beam on the fugitive vessel. Erase them simultaneously. There will be no martyrs. There will be no relics. There will be only silence. The Vigil complied. From its matte black hull, 2 filaments of non-light emerged, beams of pure dissolution that did not travel through space but simply occurred at their destination. 1 lance of absolute erasure targeted the tumbling golden record. The other targeted the heart of the Stellifer. Inside his command gel, Kalen felt the end coming not as a threat, but as a release. The countdown in his mind had reached 0. In the final microsecond of his existence, the data from the Wanderer did not feel like a contamination, but like a homecoming. He was no longer a collector, a sterile instrument of the hegemony. He was a vessel for every human who had ever lived and died on that distant blue marble. He felt the terror of a primitive hunter facing a predator in the long-forgotten grass of Africa. He felt the soaring intellectual joy of a scientist discovering a new law of the universe. He felt the fierce, irrational love of a parent for their child. He heard the symphonies, saw the paintings, and understood the poems. He understood that the chaos and the passion were not a flaw. They were the point. The hegemony had chosen to survive by cutting out its heart. But a body without a heart is just a machine. A story without a heart is just data. He embraced the final, illogical, human act. He sacrificed himself for a song. The scouring protocol turned inward. It was not an explosion. An explosion is an event of energy and matter thrown outward. This was an anti-event. The Stellifer became a hole in the universe, a point of absolute negation, space-time, reality, and the laws of physics themselves were not shattered but devoured. A perfect sphere of nothingness bloomed where the ship had been, a wound in the fabric of existence that inhaled light, gravity, and causality. Valerius's perfectly aimed beams of erasure struck the blossoming void an instant before they would have reached their targets. The beam aimed at the Stellifer was consumed without a trace, adding its energy to the growing null sphere. The beam aimed at the golden record, however, struck the edge of the distortion and was refracted. It bent. Its perfect, lethal trajectory warped by the impossible physics of Kalen's self-erasure. It missed the probe by a scant few meters, carving a silent, empty line through a neighboring derelict before dissipating into the void. Kalen's last, insane act of defiance had worked. His suicide had been a shield. His final, chaotic act had defeated Valerius's perfect logic. The Vigil was rocked, not by an explosion, but by the sheer gravitational vertigo of the event. Alarms, silent and logical, flared in Valerius's mind as the ship's reality stabilizers fought against the sucking wound in space-time. He had a choice: pursue the single, insignificant probe and risk his vessel in the unpredictable gravitational tide of Kalen's final act, or retreat and report the failure. For the first time in his existence, Executor Valerius experienced a system error. His programming demanded success. His logic demanded survival. The two were now mutually exclusive. With a cold, silent fury that was the closest he could come to rage, he chose logic. He had to preserve the instrument. The vigil unwrote itself from the chaotic sector, retreating to the clean, ordered space of the hegemony to report the unthinkable. The contagion had escaped quarantine. The story was loose. The golden record continued its slow, silent journey, tumbling end over end until it was caught in the gentle, waiting embrace of the archivist's spire. A port, like an iris of woven, living metal, opened in the side of the ancient dreadnought, and the probe was drawn inside. There, in a chamber that was part machine, part garden, the archivist waited. It was not a single creature, but a gestalt, a being of symbiotic life woven into the very structure of the ship, veins of living crystal pulsed with soft light, running alongside ancient power conduits. Its central consciousness took the form of a slender, tree-like being whose roots were the ship's neural network and whose branches ended not in leaves, but in lenses of polished, swirling energy. It reached out a limb of woven light and ancient metal and touched the golden record. It did not play the record. It absorbed it. The data, the music, the images, the hope, the sorrow, the entire chaotic soul of old Earth flowed into the living library of the archivist. And then it did something it had not done in 1,000 years. It spoke to the galaxy. From the heart of the Sargasso of ruin, a new broadcast began, overriding the panicked reports of disappearing ships and the terrified whispers of a temporal ghost. It was a single, clear signal, transmitted on all frequencies, to all corners of the galaxy. It was the sound of a human child laughing. Then came the music of Bach. Then the voice of the astronomer, no longer a faint echo, but a clear, resonant declaration. The galaxy, which had been bracing for an invasion from a silent, terrifying phantom, was met instead with an invitation. The story of humanity was no longer a lost artifact to be fought over by ghosts. It was a gift, given freely to everyone. The fear did not vanish overnight, but it began to change. It was now mingled with a profound and unsettling curiosity. Who were these beings who could wield the power of gods, yet whose final legacy was a song? Who were these creatures of silent, absolute power, from whom a single soul could break away and sacrifice everything for a memory? The hegemony had wanted to be a silent, terrifying enigma. Kalen's act, amplified by the archivist, had made them something far more dangerous, a paradox. They were a question that the galaxy now desperately needed to answer. In the living heart of its spire, the archivist finished absorbing the last of the data. It now held two stories. The first was the one etched in gold, the story of what humanity had been. The second, unwritten but far more potent, was the story of what one human had chosen to become. It was the story of a collector who became a curator, of a silent instrument that learned to sing, of a ghost who chose to burn with a fire bright enough to cast a new light on the galaxy. The hegemony was still out there, silent and wounded, its perfect logic fractured by an act of perfect sacrifice. The hunt was likely not over, but the nature of the conflict had changed. It was no longer a war of ships and weapons. It was a war of stories. And for the first time in 2 centuries, humanity had a new story to tell. It was not a tale of dominance or vengeance. It was a quiet, hopeful, and heartbreaking melody, echoing in the darkness, a testament to the fact that even in the deepest silence, a single voice, if it speaks the truth, can be enough to wake the stars.